Welcome into the Husker247 Podcast. I'm Mike Schaefer, joined by Brian Christopherson, downtown Omaha. Brian Christopherson. Brian, I think the viewers are going to notice this is slightly different than either your basement or your kitchen.
Yeah, it's not fake background. There's buildings in the old market behind me, so you can't really see it. But the Woodman Tower is out the window there. But
this is the closest I think I've ever been to an on-location interview where I'm like in studio and I'm talking to somebody that's out on the streets and doing their job.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm doing my job, but it's not quite as cool as like the Weather Channel where like I'm in a slicker getting blown around, from a hurricane. Or like some of those guys who occasionally have been busted where they kind of fake like it's worse than it is. And then it turns out that there's like people walking their dogs across the street. They're actually there's not a hurricane yet. Anyway.
Well, let's talk about the hurricane that is our most indispensable list. And I don't know that that's a good transition, but we're going to keep that in there. And I'm just going to own it, and we'll move on. Most indispensable. We're doing 23 this year, 23 for 23. I'm sure we had some honorable mentions. Brian, you handle 97% of this for Brunts and I. We just put together a list and get it over to you often weeks after the deadline of which you asked for. So I'm going to let you just have the floor and take it away.
Yeah, well, you can give some feedback on what you think so far of what we got. Now, the way we did it is you and Brunts have a vote, I have a vote, and then our message board, our loyal board members have a vote if they want it, and it's all compiled together. So they have one vote. So there's 4 total. I'll run through who we've got, who's been up so far. 23, and you can tell me what you think, good or bad, or if it's right on. 23 was Rahmir Johnson. 22 was Myles Farmer. 21 was Nate Borkercher. 21 was Thomas Fidone. 19 was Jamari Butler, and 18 just ran. That's Marques Buford. So that's where we're at right now. Amongst those 6, Myles Farmer is really interesting to me, just because I don't know what to exactly is going to happen in the competition on the back end. I know that he's played about probably more snaps than anybody on this roster. Yet in the spring game, Corey Collier was out there getting some work with the ones, and Omar Brown has really made a push. And Marques Buford, you're hopeful, comes back well from that injury and jumps into that mix. So I guess he stands out because he's a guy you would think might be higher, but I would say the reason why he's not is because I think there's some uncertainty about like how that battle is going to play out. And that's probably a good thing when you've got guys on their toes like that.
It's really interesting. I think I have multiple guys that I didn't even include on my list that would have made up the names you said there. I don't have Rahmir Johnson. I'm looking at what I sent you. I don't have Rahmir Johnson in part because I'm just not sure what role he's ultimately going to end up with. And after getting completely burned last year, where I felt like he was going to be a big part of the offensive game plan, I'm stepping all the way back with Rahmir Johnson. Marques Buford, I probably should have had on my list. But I just, with his injury, I mean, as severe as that thing was, I don't know. Is he guaranteed to just start camp without issue? Has that been discussed? Did I miss that somewhere?
I think an update's probably necessary soon on that, just to know where he's at. I mean, I'm not for sure. You would hope by that point he'd be ready to roll, but I haven't heard confirmation one way or another on that. So I'd be speaking out of turn to say. So that would be the worry, though. I think of why, and probably honestly, he would have been higher if people weren't wondering. Even if he is ready to go, you always have that curiosity, like how's that guy going to completely bounce back from this specific injury, and is he going to be the same guy? The one thing I'd say about Marques that speaks well to his how he might handle this is his first year on campus. He got injured like it wasn't as severe of an injury, but it was a pothole that he stepped into like his first day. And you thought, well, we're not going to hear from him now because he's a first year freshman and, no spring, he won't play. And by fall camp, they were talking about him. He played in every game, at least on special teams. And so he is that sort of guy where you wouldn't bet against him as long as he's out there during fall camp, especially with his knowledge base.
Yeah. Do you remember what the injury was? For some reason I have this image in my head that he had like some sort of hand-arm injury, and like that's what that was early in camp. And so then you thought it was going to set him behind, but I might be thinking of a different defensive back.
I can't remember specifically. I just know it happened like one of the
Yeah.
first plays of his first practice as a Husker, and you're thinking you just sort of have that mindset like, okay, well, that cancels him out because he's not going to get those 15 practices to impress coaches.
You immediately called him defensive back Adam Taylor. That you did?
Well, I didn't go there, but yeah, I mean that's what how that is when once a guy's sort of out of sight, out of mind, and so I don't think he's out of sight though with this. Well, obviously they recruited his brother heavily.
Yeah, he's definitely not out of mind either.
Yeah, so the family is heavy in their thoughts, and I just think that he's always around the coaches, like up there. You get the sense, and he's just like, feed me more. I want to know more. And so that's why I think even though there is some worry, or you want to know like, okay, what's the exact update on him? I think you could probably work through it and convince yourself he's going to find his way out there somehow.
Yep. I didn't have I didn't have Myles Farmer on my list either. And here's one more for you. I didn't have Thomas Fidone, but I did have Nate Borkature, and I had him in the mid-teens, I think. I think we've kind of – I don't know that we're any higher on him than anyone else in the media, but I feel like between the three of us, we find ways to sort of just work him into the conversation, maybe more than people who are expecting that this is going to be Eric Gilbert and Thomas Fidone's role. And they're just going to take over the tight end position. I think Nate Borkature is going to be really involved for this team. You could make the argument that right now, given how rusty Gilbert looked, and we don't even know what his waiver status is, you make the argument that Nate Borkature is the best tight end that is available at the beginning of August. So I slotted him fairly high because I think they like him more than maybe the general public is aware.
Yes, he's going to have a good career here. I mean, the last staff loved him. They actually, his first year on campus, he played in 4 games. And I remember Sean Beckton saying this. He intentionally cut that off with a couple games left because he saw him as a type of player where it was actually of a benefit. Like, if this guy can save that red shirt, a local
that back
guy,
end year.
Yeah, he's going to be somebody. And so that was the sort of faith they had in him at that point. And they loved him and thought he was going to succeed. And, I know sometimes people roll their eyes whenever I bring up like old staff guys' opinion, but these guys are seasoned coaches. So it's worth going back to it sometime. Mark Whipple, I remember like the first day he saw Borkature was like, that guy's not on scholarship, So, and then obviously Rhule staff thought the same thing. So I think it's totally in bounds what you say, that I don't know who's 1A in the tight end room right now. And that's why I would not put any of the guys way too high, but it's also why you better make some room for Borkature if you're going to make room for Fidone, which is fine. Because I think he could have as much a say as any of them.
Yep. I have I don't know. I had Omar Brown on my list as well. I think he was either an honorable mention or right at the very
He was
end.
on my list too. He was an honorable mention. Between our 3 votes, he would have been 23rd. I think he might be a guy that by the end of this we're saying should have been higher. That's what I kind of wonder.
Have we ever gone back and reviewed the list after the end of the season, or is it because the season is just like, a dumpster fire set out to sea? You don't really want to go back and look at the most indispensables at the end of that Iowa game.
Yeah, it's sort of like Super Sixless, Schaefer. You kind of like you do them and then you pretend like you were maybe right, but you're like, we don't have to direct anyone back to actually check the work because maybe that wouldn't be a good thing.
What do you mean Tyjon Lindsey didn't live up to the billing at Nebraska? I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, so that's the most indispensable. We're going to take a quick time out right here. We're going to come back and we're going to finish the rest of this podcast talking about everything that's going on in Nebraska recruiting. They obviously picked up a commitment over the weekend in Kamdyn Koch. They have visitors in right now as we speak. They're going to have visitors in this weekend. They're going to have a camp again on Friday. They've had camps most of the last week. And we have things to talk about, and we're going to do that next. Okay, camp season is fully here, and I gotta say, I was unprepared for the amount of offers that this staff was going to make directly to guys that camped. In no short part because the list of visitors isn't exactly awash with people with double-digit Power 5 offers. So Nebraska's going some deep pulls here. However, Brian, it does look like they found someone out of Charlotte, North Carolina that they really, really like in Derek Brown Jr. What do you know about Derek Brown Jr.?
I know that you were over there with me in what was Saturday, I guess. He had him buzzing a bit.
He was pretty easy to pick out. Like,
yes.
the guy that looks like he's
Guy,
a professional gym goer. Like, he's just completely ripped, stacked. He's standing next to some ninth grader, and you're just like, yeah, that's a guy.
That's a guy. If I were the ninth grader, I think I'd like kind of move over to the other. I think I'd move a little bit away.
Hey, Derek, nice to meet you. I'm not going to do this rep with you today.
Yeah. I think he's a guy who he came here on a mission. He's a linebacker, and he came here and he was like, I'm just going to show him that, you got to give me a scholarship. That's the plan for the weekend. And he stuck around all weekend, and he had the offer by Saturday night. And then he hung around Sunday, and he got closer, I think, to the coaches. And he said it was pretty cool. Like on Sunday morning when he came in, they're kind of, I don't know if they're like everyone stood and clapped for him or did a slow clap dramatically. I don't think it was all that, but I do think it was sort of that feeling of like, hey, I'm part of this. There's like a family feel now. You're offered. You could be in this sit at our dining table every day if you want. And he really liked that, and he liked it so much. It sounds like there's an official that's soon coming. He was plotting that even on Monday. So that's a guy who I think, he went to old Avon Farms, which is up in Connecticut, for another year of school. So he's a 24 prospect now. And I wouldn't be surprised if he keeps piling up some offers. But the fact that Nebraska was one of the bigger guys that was in on him first, I think is going to do them well.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, when I heard more about him, it's like, well, maybe they just want to take him now, because the worry is with a guy like that, and especially going to a prep school like the one he's going to, he's not going to stay a secret. I mean, especially Nebraska offering him is going to pick up on the radars, and so they're going to have to probably fight to keep this guy. But he is definitely someone that they really like, and I'm not saying that without knowledge of it. Like, this is a big target on their board, and it's wild because he wasn't necessarily a known name to anyone, prior to really last weekend. But they brought him out here. I think they had some connections that made him someone they wanted to see at camp, and he absolutely, I think, floored everybody. So I think that was the biggest story to come out of it. Next biggest story: Nebraska currently has Brian Boomshini as their punter. Could they be getting away for the son of a Nebraska legend to take over the punting position next? They got a commitment on Sunday from Kamdyn Koch, a talented specialist from Maryland and the son of Sam Cook, one of the best punters this program has ever had, one of the best punters in the NFL for most of the last, couple decades. So you talked, I believe, with Kamdyn Koch. Was this kind of always going to happen, or did this just sort of pop up here in the last few weeks?
He was surprised he got the offer right now from Nebraska. I know he knew all along that if they offered, that was it. In fact, he was supposed to go to Kansas State for a camp right after Nebraska, and he's like, well, that's not necessary, and let's not waste anybody's time. And so that's how sure he was of it. This sets up to, these things don't always work out just like we draw them up on paper, but it could be pretty seamless, because if you look at the eligibility, even if Boomshini, he has 2 more years technically. So let's say he sticks around through 24. At the worst, Kamdyn Koch would have to redshirt a year, or something like that, and then he could be the guy. So I think it sets up pretty well for those people out there like, why you gotta, off. I know some people get up in arms about too many special
Who
teams
cares?
offers and all that stuff. That's like the numbers will work themselves out. People worry way too much about that chart. Yeah, they really do. It's like, I mean, I like keeping it in, okay, they're 5 over or something. You kind of keep a watch on it, but it's like, then they're going to get there, and they're not going to overdo it with special teams guys. By the time he gets here, I would guess Bleak Road wouldn't be here. I would guess I know Marco Ortiz wouldn't be here as a long snapper. He's a 1-year guy. So the numbers are fine.
Yeah. We're looking at this class now. I believe they're up to 9 commits with Kamdyn Koch. They added Mario Buford last week. They've got official visitors coming in. This weekend they have official visitors on campus right now. Just looking at this week's guys, Brian. I mean, if you look at that official visit list for the weekend, I believe you caught up with a couple of them. Who kind of stands out to you? Everybody knows next weekend is the big one. They're going to have a lot of their top targets. They're going to have almost all of their commits in for it. But like, who stands out as you look at this official visit weekend? Of the guys that are going to be coming in to visit Nebraska. This feels almost like a research weekend for the Huskers. I mean, they not a ton of like known names, but some guys that they clearly were intrigued by at camp, guys that they're clearly intrigued by that they saw in Texas. That they're bringing in for official visits. They're almost using it less so as a, try to get them in here and commit, but more so to let's just get around this guy and see how he fits with us and see where they might stack up on the board.
Yeah, I was listening to your question wrong at the beginning, so my brain is prepared to answer it different. I was going to answer it from the previous weekend, so if you want to give the names of who's coming in, that's fine. But I was going to mention, because I thought his story was pretty interesting from this past weekend, was Tristan Johnson, and he's a D lineman who was born in Lincoln, and so he's got a lot of family here, and he's down in Hurst, Texas. He's been a Texas guy most of his life. But he actually was up here in the spring. He comes to Nebraska quite a bit because of family, and was at a practice. And Tony White sort of gave him a directive or not, a few things like he could work on. He really took it to heart for the last 2 months and was like, I'm going to go up there and I'm going to impress him. He did, and he earned an offer. And I think his story, first off, he's going to be a guy to watch, I think, because of his Nebraska connection. Tristan Johnson down in Hurst, Texas. But also just the way they sort of, with some of these guys who are offered the last couple of weeks and what they're doing going forward in June, it's like they have some initial conversations. They kind of lay it out for the guy. Here's the map we need to see from you to impress. This is what we're thinking. We're going to be honest about it. And then, if those guys actually ball out and show they belong, they're going to trust their eyes and they're going to make those offers no matter what their recruiting profile looks like. And so that's what I guess sticks out the most to me. And I'm just using that one player as an example about what happened this weekend and what I think is going to happen the rest of June, frankly.
Yeah. All right. So upcoming this weekend, Jacob Smith is the highlight, and we will make sure that he is coming in this weekend. I've seen reports that he's coming in the 23rd. I saw reports that he's coming in the 9th. Our guy, Brian Doan, said everything was set for June 16th. That's where we have him at. We'll make sure on that one. Nuku Mafi, and that could be completely botched. I apologize, but he is a Salt Lake City offensive lineman. That's a guy that Donovan Raiola knows really well. He was actually out here for the red-white game as well. Michael Burt, the hottest name in state right now. Big recruiting battle coming up. I am getting texts constantly from 24/7 sports writers that cover Iowa, cover Minnesota, cover Illinois. They want to know, is Michael Burt just going to shut it down the second he walks onto campus? So we will find out more about Michael Burt, 6'6", 230-pound tight end from Creighton Prep. Sort of a surprise guy for a lot of people that cover football here in the state. Creighton Prep not known really for throwing the football much, but I think his athleticism really impressed, Iowa, and certainly that's going to get on everyone's radar. If you're a tight end and you're offered by Iowa, suddenly everyone is interested in you, and I think that's fair. I think that's a fair way for things to go. Speaking of Iowa, Jake Peters, offensive lineman from Cedar Falls. He's a guy that earned a camp offer, the camp that you and I were at, BC. We were watching the one-on-ones that featured him and Jack Limbaugh and some other guys. Landon Davidson, an offensive lineman from Colorado, coming in for an official. Braylon Prude, believe linebacker from Texas coming in. Evan Taylor, a defensive back from North Carolina. And Callan Barta, a defensive back from Kansas. Brian, what's interesting about this grouping, you have 8 official visitors that I read off there. 6 of them are unranked right now. So this staff they're turning over some rocks right now to look at some recruits. I suspect a lot of these guys are sort of your, if you miss out on some of your high-end people, you're going to double back here. But I think a lot of it is they really like their evaluations of these individuals. Any of those guys, any of those names jump out to you?
Jake Peters does, the lineman. I really like his tape highlights. I mean, he's his first highlight, he's like driving a guy back into the ground like 10 to 15 yards, and you're just like, all right, let's go. And he's a guy that you can see where, when they communicate with him on the visits, he's a very just impressive guy to talk to. So he's a guy that I think Iowa's going to have an interest in, and I would watch closely. I think it was good that Nebraska jumped on him early. And there's some people that I know over in that Iowa area who think he's like not getting enough love. Like he's one of those players who's better than maybe some of the recruiting stuff shows. So he's a guy I'd watch.
All right. Let's finish with this. Nebraska got 2 official visitors currently right now on campus. They are hosting Caden Massey, is 6'7", 270-pound offensive lineman from Kansas. This is a guy that I think Nebraska fans should watch closely. I think it's really setting up for a Nebraska-Oklahoma battle. Grant Bricks, who's going to be coming in the next weekend, an offensive lineman from Iowa. Same kind of thing. I think you're going to see some Matt Rhule, Brent Venables battle over some of these Midwestern offensive linemen, Midwestern athletes. We're seeing it right here. I think that Nebraska has a shot at getting both of those guys, which would be a huge boon to their offensive line recruiting. They already have Gibson Pyle. Of course, they would love to get Caleb Pyfrom. I think they're taking at least 4, if not 5 offensive linemen. You see a bunch of linemen that they're bringing in for official visits. But I feel like Massey is at the high end of the board, in part because he's a developmental guy, but he's 6'7". He's a really good athlete. I mean, he's a power lifter. I just think that he is someone that this staff, is going to give themselves every opportunity to add. And so he's here currently right now on campus. So I'm hoping to catch up with him on Thursday. So be sure to check that out at Husker247.com. He's planning on hitting me up when he leaves campus. So hopefully we'll have a full update there. Malik Esquera, a 6'3", 200-pound or 190-pound safety from Texas, another guy to keep an eye on. He actually came and hung out at the camp. He didn't work out at the camp down in Texas, but he was just like, I'm just going to come and watch these guys coach at a mega camp.
Yeah.
And so there's obviously some interest there from both sides. And so that's certainly someone I would keep an eye on as well. I think he's another guy that has Texas Tech connections. That's going to be a thing. I was just talking about Oklahoma. Nebraska is just going to work against all their Big 12 opponents and Big 8 opponents and everything else. So Malik Esquera on campus as well. So busy visit weekend, busy camp schedule going on. Friday night is the only Matt Rhule Friday Night Lights camp. I'm very interested how that's going to differ from what you and I went to on Saturday, BC. Any final thoughts here as we finish up this recruiting heavy podcast?
No, you hit on most of it. I think that the biggest thing that's probably stuck out this June, no surprise really to me, but it's just like you mentioned that like there's 6 guys who I don't know if they have profiles yet or whatever.
Well, they have profiles. Some don't have pictures, and 6 of them don't have rankings.
Yeah. So that's, but the point being that they are a staff very much that it's like, I don't need to copy this person's homework over here or what, this person said about them. Obviously they're pay attention to what other people do, but I think very much they just trust their own eyes. And it's like, let's get this guy in front of them, work him out in all different forms and fashion, like they did with Quinn Clark, who was a son of the late former Husker running back Ken Clark. He's a wide receiver, tight end, 6'5" guy. They threw him in at some linebacker reps, he said, which he wasn't really that familiar with, but it was like, get him out of his comfort zone. How's he move around and stuff? And so they're really, I think they did that with Derek Brown too. It was just like, we're going to put you all over the place. And how do you respond to that? And so that's what's going on over there. And if they see the right stuff, they're not going to go like back to the computer and be like, oh, what's his offer list? It's like, our eyeballs say he should be offered. We're going to offer him. And so that's what has jumped out this June.
Yeah, the coaches don't have to go to the computer, but we implore you, the listeners, to go to the computer, get to Husker247.com. We have plenty of coverage of everything we just talked about, in-depth stories on a lot of these guys. BC wrote a great story on Derek Brown. Be sure to check that out. And, we're going to have plenty of coverage over the weekend of everything going on with the camps, with the recruiting, and all of that. There's going to be more indispensable Huskers. Perhaps I will have more representatives on my own list than what we did in the start here. And so that'll be fun to track. So be sure to get to Husker247.com. For Brian Christopherson, I'm Mike Schaefer. We're Husker247. We'll catch you next time with another Husker247 podcast.